Welcome. This is a presentation of Chapter 2 in CCNA1, and it is about how we configure a networking operating system. If you look at it, we will see that all different types of networking devices has an operating system built in. The reason is that we need to be able to communicate with the device. We need to configure it, we need to set it up, we need to be able to check and monitor if everything is working correctly. And in all Cisco devices, we have something called the Cisco Ios. And the name iOS is something that Cisco started using long before Apple started using it. It means internetworking operating system. And you know the purpose of having an operating system is, for instance, on your computer, if you didn't have an operating system, you will have to communicate directly into the hardware with a lot of very, very difficult to remember hardware codes. And the operating system takes care of that for you within the kernel. The kernel will communicate with the hardware. And on top of that, it has a shell. The shell is where we as users communicate with the operating system and therefore with the hardware. There are two different types of shells. They can either be GUI or graphical user interfaces, or it can be a command line interface, a CLI. And when we are going to work with the Cisco operating system, it will be a CLI, command line interface. So we need to know a lot of different commands, and that's the only way that we can operate the different networking devices. Yeah, when we buy a type, or what we know already from our PC is that we can just click and do something and then something will happen. We can also, in many, both in PCs and in a Mac or Unix and Linux, whatever type of operating system we have, we can also put in some commands. And something will happen and it will show us on the monitor. Almost the same thing is here on the Cisco Ios. We will just put in some command and something will happen. Everything is based on text commands. All the devices comes with the default iOS, and we can upgrade it or downgrade it or whatever we like to do afterwards. But it's very simple compared to the operating system that you will find in your computer, for instance. When you buy a Cisco device and you need to configure it, well, then there are different ways of communicating with it. If you have a home edition of some kind of a device, it typically comes predefined and pre-configured so that you can just use a web interface and then get connected to it. When you look at the high-end devices that we use in businesses and schools, well, then they are empty. So we need to put something in to be able to get it to work. And we can get a connection with it by using a specific cable and a console connection. We can either also, when we have made the initial configuration and we have an IP address or some kind of network setup, well, then we can use either Telnet or SSH to communicate with it as well. But when we have it for the first time, we put in a cable and then we use something called a terminal emulation program to get connection through the cable that we connected. And here on the school, we are using something called PuTTY. There are also different other types of terminal emulation programs. The whole idea is just to get the connection. So we put in the cable and then we make the connection and then we start the PuTTY, for instance, on our computer. And then we are able to start operating the device and start configuring it. And what we will see when we start using the operating system is that it will just say, for instance, switch your router, depending on what it is. And then there are two different modes. We can either be in user mode or we can be in privileged mode. If we are in user mode, we are not allowed to do that much. We can typically see the time and do some pinging and stuff like that, but that's it. We are not able to see the configuration, and we are definitely not able to change the configuration. If we want to see it or change it, we need to be in privileged mode. So then we just change to the privileged mode instead. And to be able to change the settings, well, then we need to go from privileged mode into a new mode called config mode. And in config mode, we can change things. And depending on what we want to change, we move downwards to another mode again. For instance, if I want to set up telnet, I go into config line. If I want to change an IP address on an interface, I go into config interfaces. So it's like a hierarchy of different modes that you go into. And to be able to move and see where you are, well, then you can see it on the prompt. You can always see in which mode you're in. And for instance, if you want to go from user mode to privileged mode, then you use the command enable. That will make you go into a privileged mode. If you want to go back again, you use either exit or end, or Control Z to go back. As you can see here, if I'm in normal user mode, the prompt is like a larger than sign. And if I'm in privileged mode, it's a hashtag. And if I'm in config mode, it says switch config and then hashtag. So I will always be able to see in which mode I'm in. When I put in a command, I put in the command name. For instance, here show is the command, and then the keyword IP protocols. This is what I want to see. Show running config will give me the running configuration. Show startup config will give me the startup configuration. Ping, the command, and then the keyword is the IP address. This is the way that all the commands are built. You have a command and then a keyword. If you need help, there are some built-in help. Here you can put in a question mark. For instance, if you say CL and a question mark, it will show you all the commands starting with CL. If you just put in a question mark, it will show you all the available commands. If I don't know how to set the clock, I will do clock set and then a question mark. It will tell me you should put in hour, minute, second now of the current time. So it will always try to help you if you use the question mark. And there are some hotkeys and shortcuts as well. You can always use the tab to complete the command. It's very helpful. You can use page up and page down to get the previous command, or you can use Control R, for instance. A good thing to know is also Control Shift 6. If a command is hanging, if you put something in and it will take too long to finish and you don't really want it to finish, you can use Control Shift 6 to interrupt the command. Yep.